The rain fell in cold, slanting sheets over the cobbled street, each drop disguising the tears that streamed down Chiara Moretti's face. She walked with her arms wrapped around herself, her thin coat already soaked through and clinging to her trembling frame. It was past midnight in Naples, and the normally lively Italian city was quiet save for the drumming of rain on pavement and the distant hum of traffic. In the glow of a flickering street lamp, Chiara's tears were invisible, swallowed by the darkness and the relentless downpour, hidden from a world that seemed not to care. Chiara's chest ached with each sob she refused to fully release. She bit down on her lower lip hard enough to taste blood, willing herself to keep it together. Not here, not on the open street. But despair had a way of breaking through no matter how hard she tried to swallow it. Her footsteps splashed through shallow puddles as she made her way, aimlessly down the empty boulevard, dreading the lonely night that awaited her. The events of the day replayed in her mind. The crumpled eviction notice still tucked in her pocket, the humiliation of being fired from her waitress job when the restaurant's new management decided to cut costs, and worst of all, the leering landlord who had suggested she could keep her apartment if she was friendly enough, an offer that made her skin crawl even now. Chiara had run out into the storm with nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and nothing except the few euros in her purse and the clothes on her back. She had hoped the rain would wash away the pain, or at least hide her tears, but it only left her shivering and exhausted, wandering through the city to avoid the alley, behind her apartment, where her landlord might still be lurking. What am I going to do? She thought bitterly. 23 years old, alone in the world since Papa died last year, and now not even a roof over her head. The world had never felt so cold and unforgiving. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the curtain of rain as a car turned onto the far end of the street. Chiara squinted and instinctively stepped closer to the building wall, wary of anyone out at this late hour. The vehicle's engine was a low, smooth purr, a sound that stood out in the silence. As it drew nearer, she could make out the sleek lines of a large black sedan, its exterior gleaming even under the rain. It wasn't the kind of car that frequented this run-down part of Naples. The polished black car looked out of place here, among the shuttered shops and graffiti-stained walls, like a predator prowling far from its usual hunting grounds. Her heartbeat quickened with uncertainty. At this hour, a lone woman on the street could too easily become a target. She lowered her gaze, hoping to appear insignificant, just a poor nobody not worth a second glance. The car slowed as it approached her. Chiara's pulse thudded in her ears. Just keep walking, she told herself. Don't attract attention. Yet her legs felt heavy, nearly rooted to the spot by fear and fatigue. The sedan rolled to a stop a few paces ahead of her, its passenger window gliding down with an expensive hum. Chiara froze. In the dim streetlight, she could just make out a man sitting in the back seat. He leaned forward slightly into the window opening, allowing the light to catch his features. What she saw made her breath catch. Sharp, dark eyes studied her intently from a strong, clean-shaven face. Rainwater dripped from a single lock of black hair that had fallen across his forehead. He wore a suit, the jacket impeccably tailored over broad shoulders, and even in the gloom she could tell it was expensive. Everything about him radiated wealth and authority. From the quiet confidence in his posture to the faint air of danger that seemed to roll off him in waves. For a moment, the only sound between them was the rain pattering on the car's hood. Chiara's heart hammered as she stood there, unsure whether to run or speak or simply remain frozen. The man's gaze flicked over her quickly, taking in her drenched state, her tear-streaked face, the tremble in her stance. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't place, something akin to concern. Finally he spoke. "It's late," he said, his voice low and even, carrying over the rain. "You shouldn't be out here alone." He spoke in Italian, his accent local but his enunciation refined, educated. There was a subtle lilt of authority in his tone, the kind that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. Chiara opened her mouth, but no words came. What could she say? That she had nowhere else to be? That she had no choice but to be out here? Instead, she took a half step back, her instincts still screaming. That a stranger's attention, especially one who exuded such quiet, power could mean trouble. But the man didn't drive away or push further, not yet. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing a fraction as if reassessing her. "You'll catch your death in this weather," the stranger said, louder this time to be heard over a rumble of thunder in the distance. He extended a hand, beckoning slightly. "Come with me. I'll take you somewhere safe." It wasn't exactly a request. Those 3 words, "come with me," were spoken gently enough, but beneath them was a note of command that brooked no argument. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran down Kiara's spine. There was something dangerous about him. She could sense it. Perhaps it was the car, or the way his bodyguard, for who else could. The big man in the driver's seat glanced back at her with a hard stare. Or perhaps it was simply the aura the man himself projected. Coiled power barely restrained by calm civility. Kiara knew all too well that stepping into a strange car in the dead of night was a risk. Yet as she stood there, soaked and miserable, the alternative was to keep wandering aimlessly until she collapsed or until someone far worse came along. The memory of her landlord's piggish grin flashed through her mind and made her stomach lurch. At least this stranger hadn't leered at her or tried to grab her. If anything, his voice held genuine concern beneath the authoritative exterior, and he was right. She was shivering uncontrollably now, her limbs numb with cold. Another hour out here and she might truly catch her death. She hesitated, her voice finally emerging in a hoarse whisper. I don't even know who you are." It was all she could think to say, a final grasp at caution. The man's dark eyes seemed to soften just a touch. "My name is Lorenzo," he said after a moment. The name rolled off his tongue with a natural grace. He did not offer a last name, and somehow, Kiara sensed that asking for one would be unwise. Names had power, and she suspected his was one that carried weight in this city. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." Promises from strangers meant little, but there was a quiet sincerity in his tone that gave her pause. Lorenzo nodded toward the open car door. The driver, a burly man with close-cropped hair, watched her impassively. The rain drummed on the roof, an impatient rhythm urging her to choose. Chiara's teeth were chattering from cold and fear. Her sodden clothes felt like ice against her skin, and she realized she was on the verge of collapsing. Whatever misgivings she had, survival instinct won out. Taking a shaky breath, she closed the distance to the car door. Lorenzo shifted back to give her space as she peered inside. The interior was dimly lit by soft amber lights, revealing butter-soft leather seats and the faint scent of cologne and rich upholstery, a warm haven compared to the storm outside. "Okay," she whispered, barely audible. With that, she forced her leaden legs to move and slid into the car's back seat. No sooner had she pulled the door shut than the driver smoothly accelerated, the tires splashing through puddles as the car glided off into the night. In the enclosed quiet of the sedan, the sounds of the storm became muted. Kiara sat tense and upright, acutely aware of the stranger, Lorenzo, beside her. A subtle warmth, from the car's heating vents, began to prickle at her frozen fingers and cheeks. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Chiara's heart thumped wildly, adrenaline still coursing through her from the leap of faith she'd just taken. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap to hide, their shaking, and kept her eyes on her mud-splattered shoes. Her mind raced with questions and doubt. Had she just traded one danger for another? She was in a car with a man she didn't know, a man who felt dangerous, and a driver who looked like he could break her in half without sweating. What if she'd just made a terrible mistake? Yet, oddly, she didn't feel immediate fear of the man beside her. If anything, what she felt was uncertainty and something almost like cautious relief. For the moment, she was warm, out of the rain, and no longer alone on the street. Whatever came next would at least be better than freezing outside or fending off a threat by herself. Kiara stole a quick glance at Lorenzo from the corner of her eye. He had settled back into his seat, regarding her quietly. In the gentle glow of the car's interior lights, he was even more striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and those eyes, dark and penetrating yet not unkind. In one hand he held a folded handkerchief, which she only realized he was offering to her when he spoke. "You're bleeding," Lorenzo said softly, nodding at her face. She blinked, confused, then remembered biting her lip earlier. Gingerly, she touched a finger to her lower lip and felt a sting. When she drew her hand away, a smear of blood glistened on her fingertip. "Oh," she mumbled. "Here." He leaned just a little closer, extending the pristine white handkerchief. It looked absurdly clean and fine against the backdrop of her dirty, rain-drenched self. Chiara hesitated before reaching out and taking it with a whispered thanks, dabbing it to her lip. She noticed the embroidery in one corner of the cloth, an ornate letter V. Not Lorenzo's initial, perhaps his last name. Again, she wondered who exactly this man was. Lorenzo's voice interrupted her thoughts. "What's your name?" he asked. His tone was polite enough, but Chiara felt that undercurrent of command again. The habit of a man used to being answered promptly. She swallowed, trying to find her voice. "Chiara," she said quietly. Her throat was raw from crying, the syllables barely more than a croak. "Chiara Moretti." "Chiara," he repeated, as if testing how it felt. He gave a single thoughtful nod. "You live around here?" A lump formed in her throat. She wasn't sure how to answer. Technically, she had lived not far from here, until that evening when her landlord had effectively thrown her out unless she did what he wanted. She couldn't bear to stay after that, even if she had nowhere to go. But she wasn't about to spill all that to a stranger. Pride and embarrassment held her tongue for a moment. But Lorenzo's steady, expectant gaze compelled her to speak. "I did. Not anymore." He considered her answer. A flicker of something like understanding crossing his face. "No family? No one to call at this hour?" Chiara shook her head, looking down at the damp handkerchief she was twisting in her fingers. "No, my father passed away. I'm on my own." "I'm sorry," Lorenzo said quietly, and he sounded like he meant it, which surprised her. People often muttered condolences without feeling, but there was a note of genuine sympathy in his voice. Chiara managed a tight nod. She didn't want to talk about Papa, not now. The ache of his loss was still too sharp, and tonight had only rubbed salt in the wound by proving how alone she truly was. Instead, she mustered the courage to ask, "Where are you taking me?" There was a brief pause. The driver glanced at Lorenzo in the rearview mirror, awaiting instruction. Lorenzo's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Someplace warm and dry. You can rest, get cleaned up. We'll figure things out from there." "We'll figure things out from there." The words were vague yet oddly reassuring in their confidence, as if it were a given, that he would help her sort out the mess her life had become tonight. Chiara didn't know if she should feel grateful or wary. Both, perhaps. She clenched the handkerchief tighter, drawing a steadying breath. "Why?" she asked softly, chancing another look at him. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Lorenzo was silent for a moment, his profile illuminated in flashes by passing streetlights. It was a strong profile, all hard lines and quiet strength. When he answered, his voice had shifted, holding a note of distance as if he were choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say," he murmured, "I don't like seeing people in trouble when I have the means to help. Consider it a personal policy. A personal policy." Chiara sensed there was more behind that statement, but his tone made it clear he wasn't going to elaborate. She nodded slowly, deciding not to press him further. After all, what choice did she have but to accept his help for now? She was in his car at his mercy. If he meant her ill, he'd hardly be reassuring her or offering handkerchiefs, and something in his demeanor, dangerous though it might, he gave her a strange sense of safety at the same time. It was paradoxical. She felt like a cornered mouse being sheltered by a lion. The lion could easily kill her, yes, but it also had no reason to if it was inclined to protect. Outside the window, Naples passed by in a blur of rain and neon. The car had left Chiara's rundown neighborhood and was heading into a part of the city she didn't recognize well. Somewhere, in the hills it seemed, as the streets began to slope upward. The buildings here grew farther apart, more affluent, with gates and driveways. Clearly Lorenzo was taking her to a wealthier district. The unease in her stomach tightened. Just who was this man who found her in the dead of night? And what kind of safe place did he have in mind? She cast another furtive glance at Lorenzo. He caught her eye this time, and for the first time she saw a hint of a smile tug at one corner of his mouth. It softened his face slightly, making him look a bit younger, more human. "Relax, Chiara," he said, voice low. "You're safe with me?" Safe. The word echoed in her head as she forced herself to nod and rest back against the seat. She watched him tap the driver's shoulder lightly. "Andiamo," Lorenzo uttered, and the driver gave a quick nod, increasing speed. The Italian word for "let's go" confirmed their forward momentum, their destination still a mystery. Chiara closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion crashing over her now that the immediate danger had passed. The steady thrumming of the car on wet roads was almost lulling. But even as her body begged for rest, her mind refused to let go of its vigilance. She peeked again at the man beside her. This stranger named Lorenzo, who had appeared out of nowhere like some dark savior. Rainwater still glistened on the shoulder of his suit from when he'd leaned out the window, and a droplet ran down the line of his jaw. Without thinking, Chiara reached into her pocket and offered back his handkerchief. "Thank you for this," she said softly, eyes lowered. He didn't immediately take it, and she glanced up to find him studying her again, those dark eyes more gentle now. He accepted the cloth, his fingers briefly brushing hers. Just a light contact, but it was enough to send an unexpected warmth through her hand that the heater had not managed. "You're welcome," Lorenzo replied quietly. A simple exchange. Yet Chiara felt as though something unspoken had passed between them in that moment. Gratitude, perhaps. Curiosity. A tentative thread of trust. Fragile, but present. The car continued through the storm, bearing Chiara toward a fate unknown. She turned her head to the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. For the first time that night, her tears had ceased. She wasn't sure if it was because she had no more left, or because in this strange twist of fate, she felt, if only for this moment, that she wasn't so completely alone. Sitting beside the mysterious man who had stopped for her in the rain, Chiara couldn't help but wonder if her life was about to change forever. Lorenzo lingered a moment in the hallway after Chiara disappeared into the guest room. He heard the soft click of the door as she closed it, and imagined her on the other side, alone and likely still trembling after the night she'd had. He ran a hand through his damp hair, his mind churning with thoughts he hadn't allowed himself to fully acknowledge in front of her. Chiara Moretti. The name had tugged at his memory the instant she'd spoken it, though he hadn't let it show. Moretti, he knew that name. A little over a year ago, an honest mechanic by that name had died in a collections incident gone wrong. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. At the time, he hadn't been the boss. His father still held the reins, and one of the capos had taken things too far with a man who owed a debt. Lorenzo had found out only after the fact. He could still recall the sick taste in his mouth when he'd learned a father, had been beaten so badly he never woke up. All over a few €1,000. Lorenzo had argued with his father, furious at the senseless brutality. But the old Don Vitale dismissed it. Examples must be made. "Weakness is more dangerous to us than cruelty," his father had said. Lorenzo had never forgotten the bitterness of that night, or the name of the victim. And now here was that victim's daughter, sleeping under his roof. A rain-soaked waif fate had dropped on his path, stirring instincts in him that he thought he'd buried. The coincidence was startling, yet Lorenzo sensed something beyond coincidence at play. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was the ghost of his own past urging him to do what was right this time. What he'd been unable to do for others. He exhaled slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket. A few taps and he sent out a brief message to one of his most trusted men to discreetly gather all available information on Chiara Moretti. If there were any more unpleasant surprises lurking in her life, he intended to know. He wouldn't be caught off guard where she was concerned. Sliding the phone away, Lorenzo realized his hands were not entirely steady. He flexed his fingers, clenching them into a fist and then opening again. The image of Chiara standing in the rain, eyes full of tears and defiance, flashed before him. Something about it had nearly stopped him cold. In that moment, she had looked so much like... He closed his eyes, swallowed. Sophia. Familiar ache swelled in his chest at the thought of his younger sister. Sophia had been just about Chiara's age when she died. Only 18. Headstrong and kind-hearted to a fault. She'd hated the violent world their family was part of. One night, after a terrible argument with their father, Sophia had run off. A rival gang had found her alone and hurt her to send a message. By the time Lorenzo discovered what had happened and rushed to her side, it was too late. He'd cradled Sophia as her life, slipped away on a rain-soaked street not unlike the one where he'd found Chiara tonight. Lorenzo's throat tightened. For years he'd lived with the rage and guilt of failing to protect his little sister. He had hardened his heart to survive in the aftermath, to become the man his father demanded he be. But seeing Chiara huddled in despair against a stormy night had pierced that hardened shell in an instant. He could not drive past her. The resemblance to Sophia in that fleeting moment, the despair in Chiara's eyes, was like a knife to the gut. Helping her had not been a choice at all. It was an imperative, almost reflexive. "I couldn't save you, Sophia," he whispered under his breath. So softly only the darkness heard. Maybe I can save her." His voice echoed faintly in the grand, silent corridor. Lorenzo straightened, rolling his shoulders back. He had taken the first step by bringing Chiara here. Now he would ensure she was safe, whatever it took. Whether it was penance for past sins or simply the right thing to do, he wasn't sure. Perhaps both. He cast a last glance at the closed guest room door. "Buonanotte, Chiara," he murmured, as if she could hear him through the wood. "Sleep well." With that, Lorenzo turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the mansion with a resolve burning quietly in his heart. Chiara awoke to sunlight streaming through a gap in heavy cream-colored curtains. For a disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was the softest thing she'd ever felt, swaddling her in warmth. Clean linen sheets and a thick duvet were wrapped around her, and a faint scent of lavender clung to the pillows. She blinked at the ornate canopy overhead, at the golden light of morning spilling into the spacious room, and wondered if she had drifted into some dream. Gingerly, Chiara sat up. Her muscles protested, stiff from cold and stress, but she felt surprisingly rested. The events of the night before trickled back. The rain, the black car, Lorenzo. She pressed a hand to her forehead as if to steady her thoughts. It hadn't been a dream. She really was here, wherever here was. Curiosity and a touch of apprehension spurred her to slide out of bed. Someone had left her backpack, containing the few possessions she'd grabbed when fleeing her apartment, on a luggage bench at the foot of the bed. The room itself was beautiful, far more luxurious than any place she'd ever stayed. The floor was polished hardwood partially covered by a plush Persian rug. One wall held a grand armoire with carved wooden doors. Another, a marble fireplace now dormant and clean. The bed she'd slept in could have easily fit 3 of her, its posts elegantly scrolled and a gauzy canopy draped overhead. Chiara's clothes from last night were nowhere to be seen, but someone had set out a fluffy robe at the foot of the bed and a pair of soft slippers below it. She realized she was wearing an oversized cotton sleep shirt, likely provided for her, far more comfortable than her soaked dress would have been. The hospitality both comforted and unnerved her. It meant someone, presumably a servant of Lorenzo's, had tended to her while she slept. She had been too dead to the world to notice. She padded to the tall windows and drew the heavy curtains aside. Sunlight flooded in, making her squint for a moment. When her eyes adjusted, a gasp escaped her lips at the sight beyond the glass. The room overlooked a terrace, and beyond that, a breathtaking panorama of the city and the sea. The villa was perched high on a hillside. Below, Naples sprawled toward the glittering Bay of Naples, whose waters sparkled under the morning sun. In the distance, the hulking silhouette of Mount Vesuvius rose against a clear blue sky, its once fiery crater now peaceful but ever watchful over the city. To the west, the coast curved toward a distant peninsula. The view was framed by lush greenery, tall cypress and pine, trees that swayed gently in a breeze. It was the most beautiful vista Chiara had ever seen. For a moment she simply stood there, absorbing the tranquility. She couldn't recall the last time she had awakened to a pleasant view, or even to simple safety. Usually her mornings were greeted by the blare of an alarm in a cramped, gray apartment, and the immediate stress of how to get through another day. This morning she heard birdsong and the distant hum of cicadas. The air that drifted through a tiny crack in the window was cool and carried the scent of the sea, mixed with flowering lemon trees that must be in the garden below. It was almost enough to make her forget her troubles, if only for a moment. Chiara's stomach rumbled faintly, reminding her she hadn't eaten since her meager lunch the day before. The thought of food made her realize she had no idea what she was expected to do now. Was Lorenzo still here? Would he have left after depositing her? The uncertainty prodded at her lingering wariness. This place might look like a paradise, but she knew nothing of its master's true intentions. She pulled on the robe over her borrowed sleep shirt and cautiously cracked open the bedroom door. The hallway beyond was quiet and sunlit, a runner carpet soft under her feet. Chiara stepped out, unsure of where to go. Almost immediately, a shape stirred at the periphery of her vision, startling her. "Buongiorno, signorina," came a gentle female voice. From a chair set against the wall, an older woman rose. She must have been waiting there all along. The woman was perhaps in her late 50s, with steel gray hair pinned neatly into a low bun, and a black dress with a white apron, an honest-to-goodness uniform like housekeepers wear in old films. Her lined face broke into a polite smile. "Did you sleep well?" Chiara clutched the robe around herself, cheeks warming in embarrassment. Yes, thank you," she replied, her voice still husky from sleep. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was there." "No need to apologize," the housekeeper said kindly. "My name is Teresa. I'm here to help you with anything you need. Mr. Lorenzo asked me to look after you." Her eyes were warm as she took in Chiara's shy, uncertain stance. "Breakfast is prepared. Whenever you feel ready, Mr. Lorenzo is waiting in the dining room." She gestured down the hall. He's still here?" Chiara hadn't meant to sound so surprised, but she was. She had half expected Lorenzo to be a phantom of the night, disappearing come daylight. Teresa's smile widened a fraction. "Of course, Signorina. This is his home. And now, at least for the moment, it is yours too." She turned and began to lead the way down the hall at a courteous pace. Chiara followed, trying not to gape at the surroundings as they went. The villa revealed itself in the daylight as an exquisite blend of old-world charm and modern comfort. They passed tall windows through which Chiara glimpsed a manicured garden outside, complete with a stone fountain glistening in the sun. The interior walls were adorned with tasteful artwork, landscape, paintings of the Italian countryside, and here and there a classical sculpture on a plinth. The floors were cool marble in some places, rich wood in others, and the ceilings rose high, with ornate moldings and the occasional fresco decorating them. It struck Chiara that this looked like a place of nobility, or at least immense wealth, the kind of home one read about in books. It only deepened the mystery of who Lorenzo truly was. Teresa chatted softly as they walked, pointing out directions. "The library is that way. If you ever wish to read, down those stairs leads to the main entrance. This is the small dining room," but Chiara only half heard. Anxiety was building in her chest at the prospect of facing Lorenzo again, now in the unforgiving honesty of daylight. Would he expect something from her? Her mind flickered to all the Mafia stories she'd heard growing up, powerful. Men who were kind, one moment and cruel the next, who believed everything had a price. No, she scolded herself internally. Don't jump to conclusions. He had been nothing but gracious so far. They reached a set of double doors made of dark wood. Teresa opened one and stepped aside, ushering Chiara through. "Go on, dear." Chiara stepped into a bright, airy room. It was indeed a dining room, though small by Teresa's description, still meant a space larger than Chiara's entire old apartment. French doors opened to the terrace she had seen from her window, and they stood ajar to let in the morning breeze. A round wooden table sat near the doors, set elegantly for two with fine china, silverware, and a simple bouquet of fresh flowers in the center. Seated there, pouring coffee from a silver carafe into 2 cups, was Lorenzo. He looked up immediately at her entrance. In the morning light, he seemed a slightly different man than the one who had rescued her in the rain. The intimidating shadows that had clung to him in the darkness were gone. Instead, Chiara saw a man perhaps in his mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal trousers, and a crisp white dress shirt with the collar open, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms. He had a watch on his wrist that gleamed of luxury, and his black hair was neatly groomed back. On his chin was the faintest hint of stubble, as though he hadn't yet shaved. What struck her most was his expression. Upon seeing her, a genuine softness relaxed his features, and the faint smile from last night returned. "Buongiorno, Chiara," he said. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." Chiara hovered near the doorway, suddenly shy. "Good morning, Lorenzo." It felt strange to speak his name aloud. She fidgeted with the tie of her robe. "I did, thank you. I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all," he assured, standing up. Ever the gentleman, he pulled out a chair at the table, gesturing for her to join him. "Please sit. You must be hungry." She was, in fact, starving, now that the aroma of coffee and fresh bread hit her. "Thank you," she murmured as she crossed the room and took the seat he indicated. Lorenzo pushed the chair in gently for her, a courtesy she'd rarely experienced. Her heart fluttered inexplicably at the simple act. Teresa appeared at her elbow with a soft napkin and draped it over Chiara's lap. "I'll bring out the rest, signore," she said to Lorenzo, who nodded. The housekeeper disappeared through a side door. You really didn't have to go to any trouble, Chiara began, feeling overwhelmed by the formal place setting and the attention. It's no trouble, Lorenzo cut in kindly. He sat down opposite her. I want you to be comfortable here. He picked up the coffee carafe. May I? Chiara managed a small smile. Yes, please. That smells wonderful. He poured steaming coffee into her delicate porcelain cup. It was a rich, dark roast. The scent alone gave her a bit of life. Chiara added a spoonful of sugar and a dash of milk from the tiny pitcher on the table. As she stirred, Teresa returned with a platter and began setting out an array of food. Fresh cornetti, Italian croissants, dusted with sugar, a bowl of mixed berries, a small plate of cheeses and prosciutto, and even a dish of scrambled eggs sprinkled with herbs. Chiara's eyes widened. This was far beyond the typical Italian breakfast of a pastry and coffee. It was a feast. Her stomach gave an ungainly growl at the sight and smell of it all. She flushed with embarrassment, but Lorenzo only chuckled softly. Perfetto, Teresa. Grazie, he said to the housekeeper, who nodded and quietly excused herself. Please help yourself, Lorenzo said to Chiara, indicating the spread. He took one of the cornetti and placed it on her plate for her, then did the same for himself. The gesture was unexpectedly domestic. Chiara half expected an awkward silence to descend, but Lorenzo spoke again as he lifted his coffee. How are you feeling this morning? She tore off a small piece of the flaky croissant, suddenly self-conscious about eating in front of him. Better, a little overwhelmed, maybe? I'm not really sure what the etiquette is for. She trailed off, looking around the lavish room, then at him. For this, his lips curved. There's no special etiquette. Eat as much as you like. You've had a rough night. Chiara took a tentative bite of the pastry. It was buttery and fresh, with a hint of sweet apricot filling. She nearly sighed at how good it was. Realizing she had more appetite than manners at the moment, she took a slightly bigger bite and chased it with a sip of coffee. Warmth spread through her. Across the table, Lorenzo watched her with an unreadable but gentle expression. She couldn't tell if he had already eaten or if he was simply waiting, letting her set the pace. His own plate remained nearly untouched except for a polite nibble at the croissant. They made small talk at first, almost cautiously, as if both understood that heavy subjects could shatter the fragile calm. Lorenzo asked if the room was to her liking, if she'd gotten enough rest. Chiara thanked him again for helping her, and he brushed it off with a humble, anyone would have done the same. She doubted that very much, plenty of people had passed her by in life when she was in need, and none had been a Lorenzo Vitale. He inquired lightly about what she might want to do in the coming days. Do you have a plan yet? Somewhere you'd like to go? I don't mean to pry, but I want to help if I can. Chiara set down her coffee cup, tracing a finger along its delicate handle. I don't have a plan. Everything happened so fast. Her throat tightened as she recalled the eviction notice, her lost job, the landlord's lewd face. I suppose first I'll need to find another job, and somewhere affordable to stay, maybe a room to rent, she faltered, knowing how pitiable it sounded when laid out like that. How impossible it all seemed with only a few euros to her name. Lorenzo tilted his head, considering her. You're welcome to stay here, at least until you get on your feet, he said calmly, as if offering to loan a phone or an umbrella, not shelter in a mansion. Chiara looked up sharply. Oh, I couldn't impose. You've already done so much. It's not an imposition, he interrupted, resting his forearms on the table. The morning light gilded the side of his face, highlighting a faint scar high on his left cheekbone that Chiara hadn't noticed before. It didn't mar his looks. Instead, it added an intriguing ruggedness. My home is secure and it's a big place. There are plenty of unused rooms. You can stay as long as you need. Chiara didn't know how to feel. Relief warred with pride inside her. It was an offer she desperately wanted to accept, at least for a little while. But how could she? She barely knew him, and the imbalance of power. Him, the wealthy rescuer. Her, the penniless stray, pricked her pride. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked softly, echoing her question from the night before, but now in the warm truth of day. For the first time, Lorenzo looked a bit unsure of himself. He glanced down at his coffee, turning the cup slowly in its saucer. I told you, I have a personal policy about helping people in trouble, he said. Then, meeting her gaze, he added, Let's just say I owe a debt or two to the universe. Maybe this is a way of paying it. Off. Kiara wasn't entirely satisfied with that enigmatic answer, but she also sensed it was all he was prepared to say. Not wanting to seem ungrateful, she nodded. I appreciate it, more than I can express. Maybe I could just stay for a day or two, until I sort things out. As long as you need, Lorenzo reiterated firmly. He lifted the coffee pot. More? She shook her head. The half cup remaining was fine. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, I will find a job soon and contribute. I don't want to freeload. If you have anything I can do for you in return. I can clean or help your housekeeper, or... Lorenzo raised a hand lightly to stop her. That's not necessary. I didn't bring you here to put you to work like Cinderella. There was a hint of dry humor there. Kiara flushed. I know, I feel strange accepting charity. He regarded her for a moment, then gave a slow nod as if coming to a decision. All right, if it makes you feel better, we'll call it a temporary employment. She blinked. Employment? I have a few business ventures, he said casually. One is a restaurant in the city center. The manager there can always use reliable staff. If you're interested, I could arrange a position for you. Waitressing, host, whatever suits. It would come with a salary, of course, and you could work without worrying about being mistreated. Slight hardness entered his voice at that, likely thinking of the people who had mistreated her already. Chiara was taken aback by the offer. A job just like that? It sounded too easy. That's very generous. But why would this manager agree just because you say so? One corner of Lorenzo's mouth lifted. He owes me a favor or two. After a sip of coffee, he added, and I happen to own the building, so I'm sure it can be arranged. Kiara had to set down her cup to process the wave of gratitude and disbelief flooding her. In less than 12 hours, this man had plucked her off the street, given her shelter, and was now offering her a path to regain independence. She didn't know whether to throw her arms around him or pinch herself. If you could do that, I would be in your debt. Signore. She stumbled a bit on the honorific. Calling him by first name still felt presumptuous, but calling him Signore, sir, felt too formal. Lorenzo waved a hand lightly. Nonsense. Let's say it benefits us both. You get a job, and I get the peace of mind knowing you're not wandering the streets at night in danger. His gaze met hers and lingered, as if to underscore his genuine concern. I know you don't want charity, so you can consider the hospitality here as a loan if you like. Pay me back whenever you're able, or pay it forward to someone else someday. Does that sound fair? Chiara's throat tightened. He was handing her exactly the terms that would allow her to accept help without feeling ashamed. She bowed her head briefly, hoping he couldn't see the gloss of emotion in her eyes. Fair, she agreed quietly. Thank you, Lorenzo, truly. They shared a small smile. Then he cleared his throat, businesslike. We should retrieve your belongings from your old apartment. I assume you left things behind in a hurry last night. Kiara tensed at the thought of returning there, of facing her landlord or even stepping into that dingy building again. But her late father's photo, a few clothes, and other personal items were indeed still there in her rented room. Yes, I have some things I'd like to get. If possible. Lorenzo noticed her change in demeanor. I'll come with you, he said immediately. We'll take the car, pick up whatever you need, and you don't have to spend a minute longer there than necessary. His offer to accompany her felt like yet another weight off her shoulders. She hadn't relished the idea of possibly confronting her landlord alone to claim her meager possessions. And truth be told, if Lorenzo was with her, that sleaze likely wouldn't dare try anything. She exhaled, a tension she hadn't realized she was holding leaving her. All right, thank you. They finished breakfast with Lorenzo, insisting she eat more and Kiara actually managing to do so. The food was too good and her body too needy for her pride to win that battle. She had a second cornetto and some fruit, and noticed Lorenzo seemed quietly pleased watching her regain her strength. Afterward, Kiara returned to her room to change into her own clothes freshly, laundered and folded on the dresser. To her surprise, she put on her spare pair of jeans and a lavender blouse. From her backpack, one of the few nice tops she owned, then pulled on her scuffed sneakers. Catching herself in the vanity mirror, she frowned. Her reflection was a mix of the new and old, her face looking more rested than it had in weeks. her eyes still carrying the uncertainty of this unusual morning, and her clothes, clean but inexpensive, an ill fit for a place like this. She ran a comb through her long brown hair, trying to tame it into a neat ponytail. There was little she could do about the faint shadows under her eyes or the stress weight loss that had made her cheeks a bit hollow. At least she looked human again, and not like a drowned ghost. When she emerged, she found Lorenzo already waiting in the foyer, speaking in low tones to the driver from last night. The space was grand, with a sweeping staircase and a marble floor that gleamed. Lorenzo noticed her and excused himself from the conversation, walking over. The driver, Chiara recalled his name was Enzo, mentioned in passing, gave her a cordial nod but remained by the door. "Ready?" Lorenzo asked gently. Chiara nodded, clutching her small purse. She had so little that even a backpack felt extraneous. For a quick trip. Yes. Lorenzo guided her to the door, his hand lightly hovering near the small of her back without actually touching, a protective gesture more than a familiar one, she sensed. Outside the sun was bright, and Chiara squinted as they walked to a sleek charcoal, gray car that was not the same one, from last night but similar in aura. Enzo opened the back door for them. Lorenzo motioned for Chiara to slide in first, then followed. With a quiet rumble, they were off down the drive. This time, Chiara had a better view of the property as they departed. The villa's exterior was pale stone with green shutters, perched amid terraced gardens. High walls and a wrought iron gate marked the perimeter, which Enzo passed through. Chiara glimpsed a security camera perched atop the gate. No wonder she had felt so safe inside. The place was a fortress disguised as paradise. As they wound down from Posillipo Hill toward the city, Chiara stole glances at Lorenzo. He seemed relaxed, one arm resting on the leather seat back, the other hand idly tapping a finger against his knee as if in thought. In the daylight, he was undeniably handsome, but also more tangible. No longer an enigmatic stranger, but a man she'd dined with, conversed with. Yet the mystery of who he truly was had only deepened. He had the kind of presence and resources that suggested someone very important. The driver, the estate, the immediate job offer, and the fact that even thugs seemed to fear his name. The pieces were falling into place in her mind, though she was reluctant to assemble them fully. The word Camorrista floated through her thoughts. A member of the Camorra, the local Mafia. Was that what he was? It would explain much and raise even more questions. Her father's death had been at the hands of criminals, after all. The thought sent an involuntary chill through her. But Lorenzo's behavior was so far from the brutish cruelty she associated with those men. She found herself not wanting to believe he could be one of them. "What are you thinking?" Lorenzo's voice cut into her reverie. He was watching her keenly. Chiara flushed, realizing she'd been staring at nothing in particular. "Oh, just about how different things look in daylight," she said lamely. It was true in a sense. He gave a soft, that might have meant he knew there was more on her mind. But he didn't press. Instead, he began to ask her casual questions about parts of Naples she'd seen, her favorite places in the city, whether she liked music. It felt almost like polite small talk one might have on a friendly outing. Chiara answered, finding the normalcy of it soothing. She told him about how she loved the view from Castel Sant'Elmo, a castle-turned-museum atop a hill, though she could rarely afford the time or money to go, and how she sometimes treated herself to a sfogliatella pastry from a particular bakery when she had a good tip day. Lorenzo listened with genuine interest, occasionally interjecting his own experiences. He mentioned a few hidden gems in the city, a family-run trattoria in a back street that made the best ragu, and a particular spot by the harbor where one could watch the sunset paint Vesuvius in pastel hues. Chiara found herself enchanted by the idea that this man, who clearly lived in a world of privilege, still appreciated such simple, authentic joys of Naples. Her earlier unease began to thaw, and by the time they neared her old neighborhood, she was chatting with a little more ease. However, as the car turned onto the familiar narrow street of her former apartment, her words died out. The surroundings here were starkly different from the villa. Graffiti-covered walls, trash littering the curbs, a couple of tough-looking youths smoking on a stoop. Even in broad daylight, the place felt gritty and unsafe. Enzo parked by the curb. Chiara's heart started to pound. Would her landlord be there? She prayed he wouldn't make a scene in front of Lorenzo. She unbuckled her seatbelt with nervous fingers. "Which building?" Lorenzo asked, peering out at the row of shabby structures. She pointed. That brown one, number 18. My room was on the 3rd floor. Lorenzo's gaze followed her indication, his eyes narrowing as he took in the dingy facade. Silently, he exited the car and came around to her side. Chiara had opened her own door, but he was there, offering a steadying hand as she got out. She wasn't sure why she needed steadying until she felt how wobbly her legs were. A mix of anxiety and the surrealness of bringing someone like him here, to the place she'd been so desperate to escape, was making her lightheaded. She led him to the front door of the apartment building. It was unlocked, unsurprising, as the lock had been broken for months and the landlord never bothered to fix it. They entered a dim, musty stairwell littered with old junk mail. As they climbed the stairs, Chiara felt shame creeping in. She hated that Lorenzo was seeing the squalor of her life laid bare like this. Each step up echoed in the cramped space. She hoped they could be in and out swiftly. They reached the 3rd floor landing. The door to her flat at 3B was slightly ajar, which set her on edge. She never left it open. Had the landlord already started clearing her things? A spike of panic. Her father's photo album. What if he'd thrown it out? Chiara hurried forward and pushed the door fully open. The living space she had, shared with 2 other tenants, each renting a room, was empty. At the moment, save for some takeout cartons on the table and a threadbare sofa, her small bedroom door was straight ahead, also ajar. She strode in and froze. Her landlord, Mr. Greco, was inside, rifling through a drawer. A stocky man in his 50s with thin, greasy hair. He nearly dropped the stack of papers in his hand when he saw Chiara in the doorway. What the— I came for my things, Chiara said coldly, finding courage now that Lorenzo's solid presence was just behind her in the hall. Greco's beady eyes flicked past her shoulder as Lorenzo stepped into view. The landlord's mouth snapped shut. He straightened, trying to look composed, but Chiara could see sweat suddenly sheen his brow. Greco cleared his throat. You didn't say you'd be comin' with friends? Lorenzo's face could have been carved from stone. He swept a disapproving glance around the cramped little bedroom, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the single bed, the water stain on the ceiling, and finally Greco himself, who was still holding Chiara's stack of personal letters in his grubby hands. I suggest you put those down, Lorenzo said softly. Greco blinked and slowly set the papers back into the drawer, raising his hand slightly as if to show compliance. Just a check in the room. It's my property and she left without notice. She left because you gave her no choice, Lorenzo interjected, voice still calm but with a razor edge beneath. He stepped further into the room. In the small space, his presence was overwhelming. Chiara saw her landlord instinctively shuffle back a half step, bumping into the nightstand. That's none of your business, Greco blustered, though his tone lacked its usual cockiness. He eyed Lorenzo's tailored attire and the quiet, lethal certainty in his eyes, clearly recalculating how to handle this unexpected visitor. Who are you exactly? Chiara held her breath. Lorenzo slipped one hand into his pocket. The other he rested on the bedpost. Casual, but somehow it conveyed an implicit dominance over the space. Someone who's here to make sure Chiara gets what she came for, without any further harassment, he said. Greco's face mottled. Harassment? Now see here. Lorenzo leaned in slightly, and though he did not raise his voice, the menace in it silenced Greco at once. You will not speak to her. You will not come near her again, he said, enunciating each word with deadly precision. If I hear otherwise, if I hear you've so much as set one toe out of line, I will personally ensure you regret it. Are we clear? Chiara watched her landlord's throat bob as he swallowed. The man who had loomed over her just yesterday, reeking of cigar smoke and predatory intent, now quivered like a mouse before a cat. He looked between Chiara and Lorenzo, perhaps realizing belatedly that whatever he'd thought her, helpless, alone, was no longer the case. I was just gonna pack up her stuff, Greco muttered. Didn't want it cluttering the place if she wasn't coming back. Lorenzo emitted a short, humorless laugh. How considerate. You can go now. We'll handle the packing. Greco bristled at being ordered around. In his own building, but one glance at Lorenzo's steely gaze and he seemed to decide, against pushing his luck. He scuttled towards the door. As he passed Chiara, he opened his mouth, perhaps, to spit one last insult or threat, but then Lorenzo took a single half step as if to follow, and Greco visibly paled, thought better of it, and hurried out without a word. The moment he was gone, Chiara let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were trembling, whether from the residual fear of confronting Greco or from witnessing how easily Lorenzo had dominated the encounter. She wasn't sure. "Thank you," she managed, turning to Lorenzo. I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." Lorenzo's expression softened slightly as he regarded her. "No need to thank me. The man's a pig." He glanced at the door, as if considering going after Greco anyway for good measure. "Are all your things here?" he asked instead. Chiara nodded and quickly moved to gather her belongings. There wasn't much. A small suitcase held most of her clothes. She collected a couple of books, a framed photograph of her father and herself from years ago, and a shoebox filled with letters and mementos. Lorenzo helped by carefully taking the photo frame from her hands, pausing to look at it. The picture showed a much younger Chiara, perhaps 12, grinning with a tall, smiling man with the same dark hair as hers, her father, Antonio. "You look like him," Lorenzo remarked quietly, and there was a note in his voice she couldn't quite decipher, something like remorse. Chiara bit her lip. "He was a good man," she said. He didn't deserve what happened." Her voice faltered. It was the first time she'd even alluded to the true cause of her father's death in front of Lorenzo. Lorenzo met her eyes. "No, he didn't," he said, and there was that same firmness and regret intermingled. His obvious understanding surprised her. She hadn't explicitly told him, but perhaps it wasn't hard for him to deduce that her father had been a victim of some crime or violence, given where and how she lived. As Chiara folded the last of her shirts into the suitcase, a pair of heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs outside. She stiffened, expecting Greco to return, but a new voice rang out. "Ciao, Bella! Back so soon?" Chiara peeked into the hallway to see a young man swaggering toward the door of 3B. It was Marco, one of the other room tenants, a local small-time delinquent who fancied himself an entrepreneur, but mostly sold contraband cigarettes and weed. He was grinning, likely at the thought of having Chiara back under the same roof. He'd hit on her more than once, undeterred by her refusals, but as soon as Marco saw Chiara wasn't alone, he pulled up short. His eyes flicked to Lorenzo, who had stepped into the doorway behind Chiara, arms crossed and stance deceptively at ease. Marco's smile faltered. "Oh, excuse, I didn't realize—" "Chiara, a friend of yours?" Lorenzo asked her mildly, but she could sense a hint of protectiveness in his posture. "Just a neighbor," she clarified. Marco looked between them, then at the packed suitcase in the room. His gaze landed on Lorenzo's expensive watch and tailored shirt. Chiara could practically see the wheels turning as he assessed the situation. She expected him to perhaps make a crude joke or remark that was his style, but instead, Marco's face took on a wary respect. To her astonishment, he addressed Lorenzo with a deferential nod. "Buongiorno." Then to Chiara, with considerably less brashness than usual. "Need help carrying anything?" Chiara was about to automatically decline, but Lorenzo spoke first. "That won't be necessary." His voice was polite but left no room for argument. Marco held up his hands. Sure. Just offering." He backed off, clearly eager not to get on this stranger's bad side. Chiara wondered what he saw that made him so submissive. Did he recognize Lorenzo as someone important, or was it simply the air of power Lorenzo exuded? Either way, Marco disappeared quickly into his own room without another word. Within minutes, Chiara had everything she owned crammed into her suitcase and one small box. It struck her how little a life of 23 years amounted to in material terms. Lorenzo picked up the box and slung the loaded suitcase with ease, insisting on carrying them both despite Chiara's protests that she could manage one. They made their way back downstairs and out to the car. Enzo swiftly exited the vehicle to open the trunk, taking the suitcase and box from Lorenzo and stowing them. As Chiara moved to open the back door and slide in, Lorenzo gently touched her elbow. "Why don't you sit up front this time? See the view?" he suggested with a small smile. It was a simple suggestion, but Chiara understood it for the kindness it was. Perhaps he thought she'd be more comfortable, or maybe he just wanted her by his side rather than behind. Either way, she nodded and allowed him to open the front passenger door for her. She climbed in, and Lorenzo joined Enzo in the back this time. As the car pulled away from the curb, Chiara found herself looking out the window at the receding building. She felt a wave of relief wash through her, knowing she wouldn't have to return there. On the sidewalk, her now former landlord Greco stood glowering by the entrance. hands stuffed in his pockets, watching them depart. Beside him, Marco had come out too, scratching his head. Two men who had given her varying degrees of trouble, both now staring after the car that spirited her away, powerless to do anything about it. Chiara leaned back and closed her eyes for a second. It felt like a chapter of her life was closing, abruptly and unexpectedly. She should have been ecstatic to leave that miserable place behind. And part of her was, but another part felt uneasy. Like she'd jumped from one precarious ledge to another. Yes, she was away from Greco's reach, but she was deeper into Lorenzo's world now, whatever that truly was. Out of the frying pan, into the fire, a small voice nagged. She glanced in the side mirror and caught sight of Lorenzo's reflection in the back seat. He met her eyes in the mirror and gave a reassuring nod, as if sensing her inner tumult. For now, she chose to trust that reassurance. He had proven nothing but protective so far. Maybe she hadn't escaped into fire after all. Maybe it was into the arms of someone who could shield her from all the flames that threatened. Back at the villa, Lorenzo insisted on carrying her things inside himself. And Chiara didn't argue. Teresa showed her a larger guest room on the second floor that she could move into, a clear upgrade from the small one she'd slept in the night before. Chiara set about unpacking, putting her few folded clothes into a wardrobe that could have fit 10 times what she owned. She carefully placed her father's framed photo on the bedside table. It struck her how absurdly out of place her old, worn belongings looked against the backdrop of such luxury. But at least here, they wouldn't be pawed through by strangers. As she finished, she found herself drawn to the window once more. Now near noon, the city beyond glimmered hazily in the sun. She wondered what Papa would think if he could see her here. Would he be relieved that she had found refuge, or worried about what strings might be attached? A knock at the door startled her. She turned to see Lorenzo leaning casually against the frame. All settled in? Chiara nodded. I think so. Thank you again for everything today. She hesitated, then added earnestly, I don't know how I can repay you. Lorenzo stepped into the room. In the daylight, his eyes were a rich brown with hints of gold. They flicked to the photo of her father. He approached it and, to her surprise, gave a small, respectful bow of his head, as if acknowledging the man in the picture. The gesture touched Chiara deeply. You don't need to worry about repaying me right now, he said gently, turning his gaze to her. Focus on yourself, on feeling safe and figuring out what you want to do next. There's time for everything else later. Chiara swallowed the knot of gratitude in her throat. Somehow, he kept finding exactly the right thing to say to ease her worries. It was as though he could peer straight into her heart. I would like to do something, though, she said. To feel useful. Is there anything at all I can help with here? I could assist Teresa, or... Lorenzo chuckled softly. Teresa would just chase you out of her kitchen, I'm afraid. She takes pride in her work and won't let a guest lift a finger. He paused, considering. However, if you're truly itching to be useful, I have some correspondence I've been neglecting, paperwork and such. My office is a bit of a mess, and I could use an extra pair of hands to sort through it. Chiara brightened. I can do that. I used to handle the invoicing at the diner on weekends, and I'm pretty good with organizing things. His eyes warmed. Perfect. We'll call you my temporary assistant. How does that sound? The word assistant made her stand a little taller. It sounded far more dignified than charity case. It sounds good, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. Lorenzo extended his hand in a half-playful, half-formal manner. Welcome to the job, Miss Moretti. She reached out and shook it, caught off guard by the spark of contact she felt even in that simple gesture. His hand was warm and steady, enveloping hers securely before letting go. For a moment they stood there, the air between them charged with an inexplicable awareness. Chiara felt her pulse quicken, and she looked away, breaking the spell. I should probably freshen up a bit first, she murmured. Of course, Lorenzo said smoothly, stepping back. Meet me in the office when you're ready. It's the second door on the right down that... Hall. He pointed outside toward another wing of the house. I'll have Enzo bring that job application paperwork we discussed as well, so we can get that going for you. That sounds great, she replied, truly meaning it. A direction, a purpose. Even if small, it anchored her spinning world. After Lorenzo left, Chiara took a moment to wash her face in the ensuite bathroom and brush. her hair properly. She gave herself a small pep talk in the mirror. It's going to be okay, one step at a time, working alongside. Lorenzo that afternoon was surprisingly comfortable. His office turned out to be a stately study lined with bookshelves. There was indeed a clutter of documents on his desk and in a couple of file boxes. Chiara rolled up her sleeves and got to work sorting, filing, and flagging items that needed his signature or attention. It felt good to focus on a task, to impose order on chaos. Lorenzo mostly worked quietly at his computer or made a few phone calls in Italian, speaking in low tones that she tried not to overhear but occasionally caught bits of. One such call ended with him barking. Something about una talpa, a mole, and risolverlo stasera, resolve it tonight. He hung up, his jaw tight, and for a second Chiara saw a flash of that dangerous edge in his expression. But when he noticed her watching, he offered a reassuring smile, the darkness receding. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, holding a stack of sorted folders. "Just business matters," he replied. "Nothing for you to worry about." She wanted to ask what kind of business, but bit her tongue. If he wanted her to know, he'd tell her. And a part of her wasn't ready to have it confirmed if her suspicions were correct. For now, in this sunlit office, he was simply a man, and she was simply his helper, and the outside world could stay outside. As the sun dipped low, painting the study in amber light, Lorenzo stretched in his chair. "You've been a tremendous help, Chiara. Look at this. I can finally see the top of my desk." Chiara smiled, pleased. "It's been fun, actually. I like organizing things." He chuckled, rotating his shoulders to loosen them. "I can tell. You have quite the talent for it." A knock at the door preceded, Teresa coming in with a tray. "Some tea, signore, signorina." She set down 2 cups and a teapot, along with a plate of little almond biscuits. Chiara realized she was thirsty and gladly accepted a cup. Lorenzo thanked Teresa, who left them with a nod. The tea was fragrant, chamomile and something sweet. "Will you have to work more tonight?" Chiara asked after a sip. Noticing that Lorenzo's phone had been buzzing intermittently, she suspected he had more to deal with once she wasn't in the way. Lorenzo considered her over the rim of his cup. "There's a meeting I need to attend later in the evening," he admitted. "Not at the house. Something downtown." "Oh." Chiara tried to sound casual. She wondered if this meeting was the resolving of whatever he'd mentioned on the phone. Perhaps something to do with the men who had been chasing him? She suddenly recalled why he'd been out so late to begin with last night. She'd never asked him, but what if he'd been dealing with dangerous affairs even then? She set her tea down, unable to shake the memory of how limp and battered his father's photo album had looked in Greco's hands. That could have been her father's fate. No, it was her father's fate to be a casualty of criminal business. And here she was growing more certain that Lorenzo was indeed entangled in such a world. "Lorenzo," she began carefully, "I know I said it's none of my business, but those men last night, the ones who hurt your friend's son." That was how he'd phrased it, as Marco being his friend's son. "Are you in danger because of them? I mean, is that why you have so much security and why you carry yourself the way you do?" He studied her quietly for a moment. "You're very perceptive. I don't want to pry," she said quickly, "but I also don't want to be ignorant if I'm caught up in something. I think I deserve to know if I'm living with someone who—" She couldn't finish. The words "who is a criminal" hung in the air unspoken. Lorenzo set his teacup aside. His posture straightened. "Chiara, look at me." She did, meeting those intense eyes. "You are safe here. Yes, my work can be dangerous. I won't lie to you about that." He took a slow breath. "I am involved in enterprises that are not exactly orthodox, the kind that require security, but I have firm rules about keeping innocents away from that ugliness. That includes you." Her heart beat faster. There it was, a carefully worded confirmation. She felt a twinge of fear, but also relief that he didn't insult her with a lie. "What if that ugliness comes looking for you here?" His jaw tightened briefly. "It won't, not here. This home is a sanctuary. No one touches what's mine on my own ground." The possessive phrasing made Chiara's stomach flip, but not in a bad way. Still, she persisted. "Those debt collectors today, they backed off because of you. And my neighbor Marco, he looked at you like he knew who you were. Are you some kind of boss, Lorenzo?" She whispered the last word. He was silent for a few heartbeats. "In certain circles, yes," he said at last, evenly. Some people would call me a boss. Chiara leaned back, processing it. She had confronted the truth. Lorenzo, Vitale was a mafia boss. He hadn't said the word, but all the hints were there. The son of Don Vitale, likely, given the family card and his father's involvement in her father's story. This realization should have terrified her. And part of her was indeed afraid. Not so much of him, but of the world he belonged to, the violence it carried. He watched her intently. I understand if that makes you uncomfortable, he said quietly. If you're having second thoughts about staying, I can arrange something else for you. Chiara shook her head automatically, then hesitated. Should she leave? Could she? If she walked out, she'd be on the street again, vulnerable to men like Greco or worse. And despite the revelations, she did not feel threatened by Lorenzo, quite the opposite. He had shown her nothing but protection and kindness. He carried guilt for what happened to her father. She sensed that strongly now, and he wanted to make it right. Not to mention, her heart had started to feel something around him. Something that clouded the black and white morality she'd once clung to about people in the Mafia. My father always said there were two kinds of men in this city, Chiara said softly, looking down at her hands. Those who make the world worse, and those who try to survive it. I always thought anyone in the Camorra was definitely the first kind. But now, she raised her eyes, finding his. Now I'm not so sure. You've been risking yourself to help me, and you didn't even know me. Why? The muscle in his cheek twitched. He stood and walked around the desk, coming to lean against it just a foot from where she sat in the chair. Being closer, he felt more real, more vulnerable somehow without the barrier of the desk between them. I lost someone I cared about because I didn't act in time, he said, voice low. I won't lose someone else if I can help it. He had told her a little of this already, and Chiara remembered the pain in his eyes. When he'd said he understood how it felt to lose family, she suspected it was more than just understanding. Your sister? She guessed gently. Lorenzo's eyes widened a fraction, then softened in resignation. Yes, Sophia. A silence fell, respectful and heavy with meaning. Chiara reached out and lightly touched his hand where it rested on the desk's edge. I'm sorry. He turned his palm to squeeze her fingers briefly. Me too. He looked down at their hands, then released her and stepped back, almost like he needed to regain some distance to control the emotion threatening to show. I have done things in my life I'm not proud of, Chiara, but I try to avoid needless pain. When my father was in charge, there was a lot of needless pain. The bitterness in his tone was palpable. I took over after he died. I've been trying to change how things are done, but it's not so simple. There are others who prefer the old ways. Chiara stood now as well. She felt the urge to offer comfort, though she wasn't sure he'd accept it. Thank you for telling me the truth. He gave a weary half-smile. You deserve that much. She looked at him steadily. I'll stay. I want to stay. Her own truth, simply put. There was danger around him, yes, but also a sense of safety she'd never felt elsewhere. And more than that, there was a connection forming that she couldn't ignore. Lorenzo visibly relaxed, a tension leaving his shoulders as if he'd been expecting her to flee. I'm glad, he said softly. Before anything more could be said, Enzo's form appeared at the door. He cleared his throat. Boss, it's time. We should head out if you don't want to keep them waiting. Boss? The word hung in the air. Chiara and Lorenzo exchanged a brief glance. He gave a tiny nod to her, acknowledging that now she knew it wouldn't be hidden. Lorenzo then addressed Enzo, his tone shifting to a cool, authoritative cadence. I'll be right there. Enzo disappeared again. Chiara's stomach tightened. Them. Who were them? Some rival? Some underling? She didn't want him to go, absurd as that was. She had no right to want him to stay safely here, just because she was now aware of the danger, but she wanted it all the same. Be careful, she blurted out, then flushed at her own forwardness. Lorenzo looked momentarily surprised, and then a gentle smile curved his lips, a genuine one that reached his eyes. I will. On impulse, he reached out and brushed the back of his hand lightly against her cheek. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent warmth flooding through her. Don't wait up, he added softly. And don't worry. Enzo will be here if you need anything. Chiara managed to smile back, leaning subtly into his touch before it withdrew. Okay. and then he was gone, striding out with the confidence of a man who owned the night. Chiara sank back into her chair, her hand lifting to her cheek where his touch still tingled. Don't worry. Easier said than done. That night stretched long and anxious. Chiara tried to distract herself by reading a book from Lorenzo's library, but found herself scanning the same page without absorbing a word. She paced the halls a bit, then settled in the TV room and channel surfed. Even the flicker of Italian, variety shows and old movies did little to calm her nerves. At one point, she peered out from an upstairs window overlooking the drive. A few guards she hadn't really noticed in daylight were more visible now, patrolling the perimeter, guns presumably under their jackets. It struck her that this was normal for him, armed men guarding his home. The average person would be terrified to live like that, but he'd known no other life perhaps. She wondered what Lorenzo was doing at that moment. Was he in a similar meeting to the one where his friend's son was attacked? The idea gnawed at her. Midnight came and went. Chiara eventually retreated to her room, determined to sleep, but sleep was elusive. She lay curled on her side, watching the moonlight drape patterns on the wall. Her mind replayed the events of the past 2 days over and over, the desperate. Walk in the rain, the car, the breakfast, the confrontation with Greco, the office work, the revelations. It felt like a lifetime compressed into 36 or so hours. Sometime in the early pre-dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her. She drifted off into a fitful slumber full of fragmented dreams. Her father's face, Sophia's imagined silhouette, a girl she never met, Lorenzo walking away into shadows. While she called for him to come back, she woke to gentle knocking on her door. Chiara sat up, heart in her throat, disoriented. Pale morning light filtered in. She'd slept in her clothes atop the covers. Another knock. "Signorina Chiara?" came Teresa's voice. "There's someone here to see you." Chiara blinked, rubbing her eyes. Someone to see her? Who on earth? Her blood ran cold. Police? That was her first wild thought. Or worse, one of Lorenzo's enemies? She hurried to the door and opened it a crack. Teresa looked concerned and a bit apologetic. "I know it's early, but he was most insistent. Said it's urgent. He?" Chiara repeated, thrown off. "Your friend, Signor Daniele, I believe?" Chiara's mind raced. Daniele was one of her father's old colleagues from the mechanic shop, a kind man in his 70s who had attended her father's funeral. She hadn't spoken to him in months. Why would he come here? How would he even know she was here? Alarmed, Chiara quickly smoothed her rumpled hair and followed Teresa down the stairs. If Daniele was here, something must have happened. In the foyer stood Daniele, cap in hand, looking deeply uneasy, as 2 of Lorenzo's guards flanked him, watchful. Chiara immediately stepped forward. "Daniele? What's wrong?" He seemed relieved at the sight of her, but his lined face was creased with worry. "Ah, Chiara, figlia mia," he greeted, voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry to barge in. It's okay. How did you—" She glanced at the guards, who must have let him in on Teresa's say-so. He answered her unfinished question. "Your phone, it was off, so I went by your old place. That neighbor boy told me you moved here. I remembered this villa. From when I was younger, everyone in the old quarter knows the Vitali estate," explained hastily. "So I chanced coming. I didn't know how else to reach you." Chiara's stomach flipped. If he'd gone to her old place, Marco probably spun some story, no wonder. Daniele was hesitant but desperate, enough to show up at a Mafia, boss's home asking for her. That alone told her something dire was happening. "What is it?" "Is someone hurt?" she urged, fearing the worst. Daniele clutched his cap. "It's your Uncle Carlo. He's been in an accident." Chiara's heart skipped. "Zio Carlo? What happened?" Her uncle, the only close relative she had left. Her father's brother, lived in Milan and they seldom talked, but still. "He was driving early this morning and he crashed. He's alive, but—" Daniela hesitated, eyes glimmering. "It's bad. He's in the hospital in Milan. One of your cousins called me, trying to reach you. They didn't have your new number, so they reached out to whoever they could and knew I might know where you were." Chiara felt the blood drain from her face. Uncle Carlo, he had practically raised her father, and while he wasn't a daily presence in her life, he'd come after Papa died to offer support. The thought of him hurt. "I need to go to Milan," she said immediately, reaching for the banister to steady herself. "I thank you, Daniele, thank you. I'll figure out a way to catch a train or you'll take the car." The new voice made them all turn. At the top of the staircase, Lorenzo stood, still in the dark clothes he'd left in last night, a bit of fatigue edging his features but eyes alert. He descended swiftly. I couldn't help overhearing. Chiara was momentarily speechless at his sudden reappearance. She hadn't even realized he was back. Relief and worry tangled in her chest. Relief that he was safe. Worry over her uncle. Lorenzo. He reached her side in seconds. A faint scent of cold night air and something coppery clung to him. She tried not to. Think about that. Your uncle is injured. You need to see him, he said. Not a question. He was already gesturing to Enzo, who had appeared behind him like a shadow, and speaking rapidly. Get the car ready. We leave for Milan immediately. Have 2 others follow in the second car for escort. Enzo nodded and hustled off, phone at his ear. Chiara felt a rush of gratitude and also conflict. You don't have to. You've just returned. You must be tired. Lorenzo looked at her intently, and in front of Daniele and the guards. He kept his tone composed but caring. Chiara, of course I will take you. Milan is a good 6-hour drive. I can get you there faster and more comfortably than any train. Daniele's eyes widened slightly at the deference and protectiveness, perhaps unconsciously, but he was. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak without betraying the emotion swelling inside her. Lorenzo turned to Daniele. Thank you for bringing this to her attention. We'll take it from here. One of my men can drive you home. If you wish, the older man bobbed his head, clearly awed and relieved that Chiara was in such capable hands. Grazie, signore. She's like a daughter to us in the old neighborhood. I was worried. Lorenzo offered a courteous half smile and placed a hand on Chiara's shoulder. I'll make sure she's all right. The warmth of his hand was reassuring. Chiara covered it briefly with her own in silent acknowledgement. In a blur, she gathered a few necessary items. Lorenzo insisted she pack more than 1 change of clothes in case. Within 20 minutes, they were in the car and pulling out of the estate. Lorenzo and Chiara sat in the back, Enzo driving, another car of his men trailing. Chiara spent much of the first hour nervously twisting her fingers and calling the Milan hospital for updates. Uncle Carlo was in surgery. Prognosis guarded. Lorenzo made sure she had everything she needed. Water. A pillow to doze if she could. Snacks, none of which she touched. He was a calming presence, occasionally checking his phone for his own issues, but largely focused on her well-being. At one point, when she felt tears of worry pricking her eyes, he took her hand and simply held it. No platitudes, no false assurances, just solid, steady comfort. It was enough to keep her from spiraling into panic. They arrived in Milan by early afternoon, having pushed the speed limit most of the way. At the hospital, Chiara practically jumped out before the car fully stopped. Lorenzo was right beside her, his hand at the small of her back as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors to the ICU. Chiara's cousin, Marta, met them, eyes red from crying. She hugged Chiara tightly, giving a quick curious glance at the tall stranger with her, but didn't ask anything in the moment. Uncle Carlo had made it through surgery but was still unconscious. Multiple fractures and internal injuries. The next 48 hours were critical. With permission, Chiara and Marta went in to see him, leaving Lorenzo in the waiting area. Carlo looked so frail, and unlike the robust man she remembered that. Chiara had to fight back sobs. She held his hand, whispered that she was there and he wasn't allowed to go anywhere because she still needed him. Marta, ever pragmatic, urged her to talk about ordinary things to him. So Chiara rambled about anything, her new job in Naples, a funny cooking mishap she had weeks ago, memories of Papa and Carlo fixing an old Vespa one summer. Hours passed. Eventually, Chiara stepped out to update Lorenzo, finding him conversing quietly with one of his men near a coffee vending machine. The sight struck her. Here he was, a figure who drew stares even in a hospital with his commanding air, yet patiently waiting on her family matter. She went to him. You should go to the hotel, she said softly. He had arranged for them to have rooms nearby if needed. I'll stay here overnight. Lorenzo frowned. I'm not leaving you here alone. I won't be alone. I have family here, she reasoned. Though Marta had gone home to rest for a bit, and her other cousin was with her kids. You've done so much. I'll be okay. He took her hands. Right there in the corridor, ignoring the curious glance of a passing nurse. Chiara, you're exhausted. If you won't come to the hotel, at least let me get you something to eat from the cafeteria. You haven't eaten all day. She opened her mouth to protest, but just then her stomach gave an ill-timed growl. She hadn't even noticed hunger in her worry. Cheeks flushing, she acquiesced. Maybe a little something, Lorenzo, gave a satisfied nod and guided her towards the cafeteria, over a tray of soup and bread which he practically had to cajole her to finish. He finally filled her in on one thing. He had business in Milan too, as it turned out. I might need to step out tomorrow for a meeting, he said carefully. But I'll arrange for one of our friends here. He nodded at his nearby guard. To stay with you while I'm gone, and I'll be back as soon as possible. Chiara realized that even here, he was balancing two worlds, her crisis and his own dealings. She bit her lip. Is it dangerous? Lorenzo shook his head, perhaps a half-truth. Routine. Don't worry about me. It was a mirror of what she told him last night, and she gave him a look that said she didn't quite buy it. But she also understood he couldn't just drop everything indefinitely, and he had already gone above and beyond. That night, Lorenzo convinced her to rest at least a few hours at the hotel while Marta stayed at Carlo's bedside. Chiara only agreed if Lorenzo promised to wake her if there was any change. He got a room adjoining hers, and surprisingly, she fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow, the emotional toll knocking her out. True to his word, Lorenzo woke her at dawn to return to the hospital. Uncle Carlo was stable, still unconscious, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic now. Relieved, Chiara spent the morning alternating between sitting with Carlo and sitting with Lorenzo in the waiting area when visitors were limited, talking quietly. At midday, Lorenzo had to leave for his meeting. Chiara mustered a brave smile, squeezing his hand. Thank you for everything. Go do what you need to. I'll be here. He hesitated as if to say more, then simply leaned and pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'll be back soon. Stay safe. She nodded, watching him stride away with Enzo and another guard. The moment he disappeared, she felt an ache of absence. Ridiculous, considering she was in a hospital around people. But his presence had been her rock through this. Afternoon wore on. Uncle Carlo finally woke up briefly in the evening, groggy but responsive. Chiara nearly cried in relief, speaking gently to him until he drifted off again. It seemed the worst was over. Only now did she truly breathe and think beyond the immediate. And she thought of Lorenzo. Where was he? It was now late evening. His meeting, whatever it was, had taken hours. She texted him an update on Carlo and a "Are you okay?" but got no response. Worry for him slowly replaced worry for her uncle. Night fell. Marta insisted Chiara go to the hotel to sleep properly since Carlo was stable. Chiara agreed, mostly because her anxious pacing was wearing Marta out. At the hotel room, she found herself alone. Lorenzo's adjoining room was empty, bed untouched. She tried calling him, but it went to voicemail. Attempting to quell the fear churning in her gut, she lay down and eventually slept, clutching her phone in her hand. It was just past 3 a.m. when the door to her room clicked open. Chiara woke with a start, sitting up in alarm only to see Lorenzo standing there. He looked exhausted. There was a bruise high on his cheekbone and dried blood on the cuff of his shirt, but when he saw her awake, he mustered a reassuring smile. Sorry to wake you. I didn't mean to let myself in unannounced, he said softly. Chiara was already out of bed and crossing the room. What happened? You're hurt. She gently touched the bruise on his face. Lorenzo caught her hand and held it. Just a scrape. You should see the other guy, he tried to joke. Her heart ached at the sight of him battered. On impulse, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Careful, but firm. I was so worried, she whispered. For a second, he went very still, as if stunned by the embrace. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close. He exhaled a long breath against her hair. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't want you to worry. Chiara only held him tighter. In that moment, the sterile hospital walls, the dangers of the night, all of it faded. There was just Lorenzo, solid and alive in her arms. She realized fully then how deep her feelings had grown. It wasn't just gratitude or friendship. It was something far more intense. She leaned back to look at him. His eyes searched hers, and whatever he saw there made something in them soften, like a wall crumbling. He cupped her cheek gently. Chiara. Her name was a plea on his lips. She answered by rising on tiptoe and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Then Lorenzo made a low noise in his throat and kissed her back with a hunger that stole her breath. He tasted like mint and a hint of whiskey, and the warmth of him against her chased away every lingering chill of fear. He broke the kiss only to cradle her face and look at her with astonishment and devotion. "Ti amo, Chiara," he whispered fervently, the Italian words rolling off his tongue before he seemed to think them through. He paused, as if surprised at himself, then repeated in English, voice hoarse, "I love you." Tears sprang to her eyes, joy amidst the chaos. "I love you too, Lorenzo," she replied, not a trace of doubt in her heart. He kissed her again, deeply, as though affirming those words with every fiber of his being. Chiara felt herself melting into him, safe and cherished. They spent what remained of that night tangled in each other's arms, finding comfort and passion that had long been building. Under the faint glow of the city lights through the window, they made silent promises with every touch. By the next morning, Uncle Carlo's improvement was significant. Plans were made for him to recover in a rehabilitation facility, and Chiara promised to visit again soon. Carlo, weak but lucid, met Lorenzo and gave a feeble chuckle after learning who he was. "Your father and I would never have had coffee together," he rasped. "But you I can thank for taking care of my little niece." Lorenzo smiled gently and shook the old man's hand. "It's an honor to know her." On the drive back to Naples, Chiara and Lorenzo sat closer than ever in the back seat. She rested her head on his shoulder, fingers entwined with his. The open ending of what lay ahead didn't scare her anymore, not as long as he was beside her. It was dawn when they reached the outskirts of Naples. The sky was a watercolor of pink and gold. Lorenzo asked Enzo to pull over at a scenic lookout on Posillipo Hill. From there, they could see the bay and the city waking up below. They stood outside the car, the breeze ruffling Chiara's hair. Lorenzo came behind her, wrapping his arms around her, waist and resting his chin on her shoulder, as they watched the first rays of sunlight dance on the water. "So what now?" Chiara murmured, covering his hands with hers. "Now," Lorenzo said softly, "we take it one day at a time, together." She turned in his arms to face him. His handsome face still bore the remnants of the recent violence, a fading bruise, a healing cut on his lip, but his eyes were warm and clear, filled with a calm determination. "I don't know what the future holds," Chiara admitted quietly. "There's a lot we'll have to deal with. Your world, and I still have to figure out what I'm doing with my life." Lorenzo brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Whatever it is, you won't face it alone. If you'll have me, I'm not going anywhere." Chiara felt tears of happiness prick her eyes. The very streets that had felt so cold and cruel just a short time ago were now painted in hopeful light. "I'm not afraid, as long as we're together," she said. Lorenzo kissed her forehead, then tilted her chin up to place a tender kiss on her lips. When they parted, he smiled. "Look at that," he said, nodding toward the east. Chiara followed his gaze. The sun had fully emerged, casting brilliant rays across the bay. The night was over. A new day was breaking. Not long ago, she had hidden her tears in the rain, believing darkness was all that awaited her. But now she realized those tears had nourished the seeds of something unexpected and beautiful. With Lorenzo's hand in hers and the vast open horizon before them, she felt something she hadn't in a very long time: hope. They got back into the car, the black sedan that had once been a harbinger of fear, now a familiar friend. As Enzo steered them down the winding road toward home, Chiara leaned on Lorenzo and closed her eyes briefly, committing the feel of this moment to memory. Their story was far from over. Loose ends dangled, dangers lingered in the shadows, and the world around them remained uncertain. But in that uncertainty lay a promise of possibility, and in their entwined fingers lay the promise of devotion. Chiara looked at Lorenzo, her dark angel who had stepped out of the night to change her life. He met her gaze and gave her that smile that was just for her. Neither had all the answers. Neither knew if fate had more twists in store, but they had chosen each other against all odds. And so, as Naples glowed in the morning light, they drove on together into whatever future waited, their hearts steadfast, their souls intertwined. In the gentle silence, Chiara let a few tears escape, not of sorrow or fear, but of profound quiet joy. She didn't hide them anymore. Lorenzo saw and brought her hand to his lips in understanding. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings bloom right after the storm.